Thanks, Bob, and good morning, everybody. For the past 2 days, it's been my privilege to be part of this audience, and I think this symposium has just been out of this world. And all the high-quality, up-to-date research and management reports I've heard during this time, it's given me a different feelings of humility, pride, and nostalgia, and sometimes makes me a little bit envious and sad when I think of all the terrific information that's been passed on here in the last 2 days that we could have used back about 40 years ago when we were managing and working on Muskie by the seat of our pants. I think that I should mention too that I'm mighty proud to be associated with all you people. If anyone had mentioned that we as managers and researchers would be assembled here in this way 40 years ago, well, I think they'd call you a little bit off base. But I'm proud to be associated with all you people, and particularly the individuals who took time out to come from all the several states and from Canada. Believe me, that's a tribute. We've been talking about muskies for the past 2 days. Now this panel wants to talk about you, the angler, the professional, the manager, the researcher. Over 300 years ago, the basic guide for the role of the angler was laid down in a book written by Isaac Walton, who died in London at the age of 90 on December 16, 1683. The book, entitled The Complete Angler, or The Contemplative Man's Recreation, was first published in 1653 and has been reprinted in 162 editions in the past 3 centuries. I don't know how many of you have read it, but I just reviewed it in the last 6 months. The angler's role since its documentation in the 17th century until early in the last decade has been largely exploitive. In addition to the pleasurable aspects of this contemplative sport, a full creel or a bag limit has always been the goal in the past. Now, in 1984, 300 years after Walton's pronouncement, the muskie angler's role is being revised from purely harvest to recycling, as you heard the previous speakers, from filling the creel to catch and release, and from fishing for food to fishing for fun. All this effort, in an effort to maximize the angler's gratification by a switch from quantity to quality. But what Ike Walton said back there about the time this country was colonized is still applicable to the muskie angler. And I quote from The Complete Angler: "He that hopes to be a good angler must not only bring an inquiring, searching, observing wit, but he must bring a large measure of hope and patience and a love and propensity to the art itself," unquote. To paraphrase Ernie Swift, former director of the Wisconsin Conservation Department, fish management is a subject wrapped up in a complexity of human emotions and at times misguided energy. It is analogous to Josh Billings' observation when he said, "It ain't that people are ignorant, it's just that they know so many things that ain't so." Well, feeling the need to promote a better understanding, this panel draws upon the knowledge and expertise of a government agency administrator, a journalist, an aquatic biologist, and a sportsman, and an anglers group representative. They are here to provide you with clues and direction which we hope will stimulate sound thought and action on all fish management issues and a few questions after a while, not just those affecting the management of muskellunge. Our first speaker brings the experience and perspective of an educator and a journalist to this panel. He spent 10 years training and preparing youngsters for life careers at Sibley Junior High School in Sibley, Iowa. He then started a new career in journalism, guiding adults in fishing technique information. He is now managing editor of the Young Fisherman magazine at Brainerd, Minnesota. Doug Stang will now set the stage for this panel with his ideas of the responsibility of the angler and the professional. Doug.
Thank you, Art. Clearly, some problems do face the future of muskie fishing. Now, none of these problems are beyond resolve, but they definitely need the attention of anglers and private fishing organizations like Muskies Incorporated and Muskies Canada, and of course, fisheries professionals. Now, these groups have got to work together. There's got to be commitment and cooperation and communication at all points between these groups. And with that in mind, I'd like to make some suggestions. My first suggestion would be simply, and I'm talking directly now to anglers and fisheries professionals, my first suggestion would be simply, will you remember that you're in this together and that you've got common goals? Okay, anglers first of all. Fisheries professionals have dedicated their lives to the proper management of our fisheries. They have a serious love for and a desire to maintain fishing. And the management options that they choose are usually chosen with that desire in mind. It's not that everything that they do is always going to be correct, although most of the time it is. It's just simply that whatever is done with the good of the fisheries in mind. Now, fisheries professionals, on the other hand, the anglers have the same goals as you do. Okay, now there's a very large education gap existing between your two groups, however. And this education gap results in very large communication problems. So don't become aloof. Don't assume nor all positions that result in trying to tackle problems all by yourself. The public will always become a problem at times, but fisheries goals are best accomplished when the public understands those goals and then is enlisted in an attempt to achieve them. So my second suggestion then would logically follow the first. That is, you've got to listen to each other. Anglers, I think you violate this piece of advice way too often. You cannot assume that your on-the-water experience gives you the knowledge that's necessary to handle the technical problems involved with managing a fishery. It just doesn't work. Too often management options are suspect just because they're new. And sometimes they're suspect because they're old. And everything cannot always appear logical. Okay, you've got to listen, you've got to be open-minded, you've got to question things in a sincere manner. If you're going to disagree, you've got to disagree agreeably, because if biologists have to be on the defensive all the time, it's difficult to get things done. Fisheries professionals. Angler conflict is always going to be a part of your professional life. And you've got to try to keep it from hardening your hearts and ruining your overall relationship with anglers. Like a school teacher or a preacher, your job seems hopeless from time to time, but you've got to keep plugging away. And I think another thing is that fisheries science is a relatively new science. And so some of the things that you do, you have to admit some mistakes along with your many accomplishments. Ultimately, of course, it comes down to you to make the decisions, but you've got to keep remembering that anglers have some viewpoints that are very important also. So you've got to take time to listen. Okay, thirdly, my suggestion to both groups would simply be patient. Anglers, you realize that your fishing knowledge wasn't gathered overnight. Well, neither will any technical knowledge. It has to be, that has to do with the involvement of managing a fishery. That's not going to come overnight. But if you're serious and you really want to learn, it'll happen. Okay, if you think that you know all the answers before you even start, it can't possibly happen. And because fisheries science is a relatively new science, it's very, very important that you support these people as much as you possibly can. Okay, fisheries professionals, you've got to be patient too. I think the most important thing is you've got to be patient and unfailing in your attempts to bring more advanced fisheries education to anglers. Okay, now the history of any worthwhile endeavor suggests that there's going to be a substantial time period involved in bringing something like this to fruition. Just keep plugging away. Fourthly, my fourth suggestion is relative to the other three. And that is you've got to keep a perspective on who you are and what you know. In other words, you've got to have a clear picture where you fit into this total muskie fishing picture. And I think I'd talk to fisheries professionals first this time. You have to guard, as I mentioned a while ago, guard against raising your defenses too much based on angler criticism, which you're always going to have. And don't become the aloof know-it-all professional. Above all, I think your display of patience, even in the face of some ignorance, is part of the fisheries professional that you're supposed to be. Okay, keep considering, though, that groups of anglers can provide a viewpoint unique from your own. Of course, you know that 50 different anglers are going to come up with 50 different ways to handle the same problem. But you are usually better off for having heard those 50 different ideas. Now, because you're the one with most of the technical knowledge, it's up to you to blend those 50 ideas with science and come up with workable solutions to problems. And that's not going to be easy. Okay, anglers, on the other hand, you've got to keep a perspective on who you are also. The fact of the matter is that you don't have from 4 to 7 to 8, or like Art has here, over 40 years of experience with the technical things involved with managing a fishery. You just don't have it. Okay, on the other hand, though, you spend all this time fishing, and you see things. You have a unique perspective and an important one. Okay, actually, it's your job to initiate biological inquiry. Okay, just like a law officer can't observe all the problems that happen on the streets, neither can a biologist observe everything that's happening out in the environment. So you've got to help out. But you've got to keep a perspective on who you are. Your observations are only a small part, and the rest of it has to be filled in by science. Okay, now let's move in a little bit different direction for just a moment. Okay, we're discussing the role of anglers in private organizations and the relationship to fisheries professionals. Okay, this role can't be played properly without communication and cooperation. Okay, I think the Symposium is testimony to the fact that these things will work. Okay, but everything isn't perfect. Okay, let's talk for a moment about the reliability of angler data, the reliability of angler information. My perception is that the fact is that angler information is likely to be biased. And the reasons, there's really no revelation in the reasons. If an angler catches a big muskie in a certain region, he'd rather that region not be known. And if the region's known, he'd rather the lake wasn't known. If the lake's known, he'd rather the weed bar wasn't known. And on and on. And then too, frustration and intense pressure to release muskies may also influence the reliability of catch and release and catch and keep data. All fishermen are liars except you and me, and I'm not too sure about you. I think that's too harsh. But the fact of the matter is, if you fish for 40 hours, and then you catch this muskie and you lose him 3 feet from the boat, there's going to be an awful lot of times when that fish is counted as a caught and released fish. And maybe it should be, I don't know. That's close, anyway. Okay. Likewise, intense peer pressure to release fish may result in releasing terribly injured fish that are going to die. And those aren't true releases. But the pressure may cause that to happen from time to time. On every front, from lure type and technique used to length and weight of fish caught to whether fish are released or not released, I think you can expect some bias in muskie fishing information from anglers. Okay, but reliable data is absolutely necessary in order for management options to be formed. So mandatory reporting may work in some instances. Another approach may be use smaller, more reliable samples. In other words, working with a small number of anglers on a personal level and with a promise of confidentiality. Okay, now what about the future of muskie fishing? Is there a danger that our fishing has become so advanced that we're going to have new regulations? I think there's no question that angler ability to harvest fish has grown tremendously. Boats, motors, tackles, it's all been refined, and it's all used by an ever-present and ever-increasing army of anglers. Okay, while most muskie catches are correctly attributed to a small group of ardent muskie anglers, today technology alone allows even mediocre anglers to catch an occasional muskie, and these catches are usually killed. But what of the small group of elite muskie anglers who indeed catch most of the muskies? Okay, I think I even misstated myself there because the group is no longer small. There's a growing number of elite anglers that target almost all of their fishing time to one species, one very limited species. Okay, today's advanced angler understands intricate details of muskie location, and he's well versed in methods that make muskies strike. Okay, while these anglers do release most of their fish, there's always some mortality associated with fishing. Okay, some fish are still killed for food, a few for photos, a few for trophies, and there's always some post-release mortality. Okay, another consideration is that much of the kill pressure by advanced anglers is directed at the big fish segment of any muskie population, and that's the segment that can least withstand harvest. Okay, so serious muskie anglers face a real dilemma. Muskie fishing is so wonderful that everybody should enjoy it. At the same time, there's not enough muskies to go around. So, should Muskies Incorporated and Muskies Canada strive to increase membership in the number of ardent, informed muskie anglers at a time when there really isn't enough muskies to go around? It's a tough, but I think an altogether appropriate question. Okay, the goal of catch and release efforts is to increase muskie size and numbers. This is indeed worthwhile. However, while things would be much, much worse without catch and release, the effort seems to be overwhelmed. Okay, just by sheer odds, incidental catch kills by anglers seeking other fish, plus occasional kills by serious muskie anglers who usually release their fish, seems to overwhelm the catch and release effort. It isn't that catch and release isn't doing any good. It definitely is. Still, it seems like our goal isn't achievable only through voluntary catch and release. As a result, in many environments, probably most, we're facing reduced average fish size, fewer fish, and a slim chance of ever producing one of these truly huge fish. Okay, there isn't likely to be a retreat from the trend towards more advanced fishing and more anglers. Okay, I think new regulations are necessary. I believe innovative management techniques will be well received by ardent muskie anglers, but I'm not so sure that's true of the general fishing public. Okay, real new regulations need to be on tackle and technique. At this point, history seems to indicate that anglers always take the tackle and techniques that are available to them, they refine them, and they have the possibility of still impacting muskie populations. Therefore, no matter what new regulations are tried, the finest among many answers remains ever-increasing angler knowledge of what it really takes to conserve muskies.
Thank you, Doug. I know the teaching profession misses Doug Stang, and if they don't, why, I'll miss my guess. He's still an educator. The next panelist lives at Cavalier, North Dakota, which is very close to the Canadian border and also the Lake of the Woods, which, when translated, means that he spends a lot of his time on the water, catching and releasing trophy-sized muskies. When he can't fish, he's very busy helping out on various Muskies Inc. projects. He's quite a fact finder, probably a spin-off from his regular duties as a patrol officer for the North Dakota highways. He has circularized almost all the United States and Canadian muskie clubs with inquiries on their muskellunge management programs, and has compiled a wealth of data on their current status and activities of these organizations. Keith Ogden will now give us some of the results of his national survey of muskie fishing clubs. Oops.
Muskie fishermen are a major key to the success of the muskie sport fishery surviving in this sophisticated fishing world. When these fishermen do team up, forming one of 60 known muskie clubs or organizations, miracles can be achieved and recorded. The angler alone can contribute to the fishery by release of trophy and non-trophy muskie. He can support beneficiary muskie legislation by contacting his or her local legislator and voicing his opinion. These are very valuable donations to the muskie fishery. However, when this individual muskie fisherman does become a part of a muskie club or organization, his voice can be one of hundreds urging important muskie legislation. The angler's released fish can become a part of a valuable statistic for DNR research. Anglers' assistance as a team can operate a rearing pond, become a part of a tagging team, assist DNR operations in muskie projects, and become a part of fundraisers that purchase fingerlings or fund DNR muskie projects. Muskie clubs and organizations bring willing and concerned fishermen together where numbers can accomplish what individuals cannot. The Muskie Symposium Muskie Club Committee has located 52 of these 60 clubs and organizations throughout the Muskie's range. These clubs represent 9,700 muskie fishermen in 15 states and provinces. We have surveyed these clubs in hopes of uncovering some very valuable contributions they have made to the muskie sport fishery. The results were staggering. The single greatest contribution to the muskie fishery by the individual is the release of the trophy and non-trophy fish. When these successful releases again are recorded by the clubs, the release program can definitely stand up and be noticed. The Muskie Club surveyed averaged approximately 80 to 85% of the muskies caught released. Muskie organizations responded that their members have released 29,319 legal muskies to reproduce, hopefully, and fight again another day. If 50% of these releases represent adult females reproducing one more season, the fisherman can now visualize a donation to his or her favorite lake of thousands and thousands of dollars. Many state DNR muskie projects require many hands and able volunteering bodies. Many of the muskie clubs surveyed have participated in these state projects with monetary and or manpower assistance. It was determined that of the organizations responding to our survey, muskie clubs have donated 26,250 man-hours to DNR projects. $165,400 were donated by clubs to the DNR projects, muskie projects. We have uncovered that 7 muskie clubs, and this is a real biggie, I think, have undertaken the management of their own rearing pond. Along with the above rearing pond managers, we have 22 muskie clubs or organizations that have purchased muskie fingerlings. Combining the pond managers with the clubs that purchased the muskies, we can boast that clubs have purchased or reared 190,327 muskies directly as a result of Muskie Club and or DNR in conjunction with each other or whatever organizations. That number of total muskies have been stocked. Tagging is becoming one of the most important phases of research on adult muskies. Of the clubs surveyed and responding, 17 clubs have members currently tagging. Many other clubs voiced the opinion that they would like to tag, however, some state regulations put a crimp on that. These members have placed valuable tags on 2,013 muskies. We have uncovered muskie clubs boasting expertise in youth programs, fundraisers, rearing pond management, tagging, membership drives, DNR assistance, members outings, tournaments, senior citizens outings, meeting programs, muskie stocking, and a biggie, public release programs, just to mention a few. Members of muskie clubs and organizations can be proud of their many accomplishments, and if the fishing club aspect would only take a hold with all other sport fish species, it would definitely be a better fishing world. I have had great pleasure working with the clubs and organizations throughout the muskies range, and for their many hundreds of contributions that are much too numerous to mention here today, I would really appreciate if this audience would show them their appreciation with a hand.
In the early stages of planning this panel, I wondered whether or not we were going to be honored with the presence of our next speaker, who has to be the busiest guy in Madison, Wisconsin, where he holds forth as the director of the Bureau of Fish Management for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Jim Addis has come up the line from Ohio State University to the Ohio Division of Wildlife, where he served for 4 years as a biologist. He joined the Wisconsin DNR as a fish manager in 1974, and in 1976 he took charge of the state fishery program. The busy schedule of directing, the planning, and implementing of one of the nation's progressive fish programs includes the assessment of cooperative efforts of anglers and their organizations. Jim has agreed to take time out to give us an update on these sportsmen's contributions. Jim.
Cheap suit, it's slippery. Thank you, Art, ladies and gentlemen. It's certainly a pleasure to have the opportunity to come and speak with you. I think it's the three questions I was given to answer were: are angling organizations effective in providing for the improvement of fisheries programs? What do professionals see as your role, and where do we go from here? I guess that this symposium has more than answered the first question. Indeed, you have been enormously effective, and that effectiveness is in part the result of a deep caring for muskies, for fishing, and for the outdoors. I think that that is almost shown by the fact that this symposium has more the air of a very conservative church service than it does a sportsman's club. I think that I've never seen more sober people, both professionals and managers, in my entire life. And I hope, for gosh sakes, you remember we're here because it's fun. And we like to fish because it's fun. So don't lose track of that, because I think we all have been going around here looking like we just lost our best friend. I'd like to say that I think your effectiveness in the past ought to be put in perspective of what it allows you as anglers to do today. I think the effectiveness started when in the 1850s, in Wisconsin at least, we started regulating the overuse and overharvest of resources. But by the mid-30s, we began to recognize that that was not the single enemy of fisheries and aquatic resources, but indeed the enemy was a twofold problem. One, that the powers to be dealt mainly with development of our resources rather than wise use and preservation of our resources. In those days, anglers became concerned about the environment, about pollution, about that sort of thing. At the same time, you recognize that decision makers who were there primarily as a result of some political process did not have in their interest primarily resource or the broader context, but rather the interest that got them to the position of being elected or whatever. And I think that if you look at the stage of the 30s and 40s, there was a vast movement in this country to begin dropping the patronage approach to resource management and instilling professional resource management. By the mid-50s or the early 50s, the late 40s, indeed there were numerous organizations in this nation formed by state legislators, like the Wisconsin Natural Resources Board, or at that time the Conservation Commission, which was a citizens' policy-making board that guided professional management. I think that the conversion to professional management and then scientific management has laid the groundwork for where we are today. And I guess, as Art said, in 1940 you wouldn't have expected this kind of symposium, because in 1940 most of the states of this nation didn't even have a professional biologist working for them on a day-to-day management basis. In the mid-50s we saw the resurgence of anglers' support for pollution and for the scientific management of fisheries, and you brought about the Dingell-Johnson expansion, or the existence of the Dingell-Johnson. And the Dingell-Johnson Act has provided the very basis for most of the kinds of research you've seen here the last couple of days. Prior to that time, there was little or no fisheries research in this nation, other than at the macro level in some government and at the academic institutions. I think that this commitment to the environment, to scientific management, and to professional management, non-patronage management, has made it possible for us to sit down today in the last 3 days and talk about the kinds of things that we can talk about. You have thousands of acres, or millions of acres indeed, of waters that are now fishable and swimmable that weren't several years ago. You have professional managers who have databases, as sparse as they may seem to us technical people, that are just light years ahead of what we had 50 years ago and even 25 years ago. You have been successful, and I think you ought to be proud of that success. I won't allude to the things that Wisconsin anglers have done. They've already been pointed out by Keith in terms of the day-to-day things that you're doing. What do I see as some of the problems? I think the problems are big. I think that the road to the future is a rough one, but I'm optimistic that we can solve it. I don't think we can forget about the environment. I think that the habitat questions you saw raised on the first day of this meeting are key to any future, whether you want catch or release or anything else. If there isn't muskie habitat, if we allow our shorelines to be developed, if we allow our weeds to be treated and chemicals insidiously dumped into the waters, we're not going to have muskie fishing despite how good these guys can raise them and manage them in terms of the dynamics of the population. You've got to keep on the environmental movement at this time more than ever before. Secondly, I'm very anxious about the fact that we're breaking up the angling community into muskie clubs, walleye clubs, skinfish for tomorrow, for catfish. We got everything in Wisconsin. Trout Unlimited, because it begins to split the angling community into units that start to argue amongst themselves. For example, I get about equal calls from the Woodruff-Minocqua area about Dick Went and his people dumping those damn muskies in and ruining pan fishing and walleye fishing, and the number of people calling and raising hell about we need more muskies. So what I see happening is you're beginning to splinter your interest like the rest of our society is splintering, and that has some high risks in it, because you may lose perspective that your basic interests, whether you're a walleye fisherman, a trout fisherman, or anyone else, is to continue to force professional management, scientific management, and the environmental protection. So be careful of that. I see an increasing effort on the part of clubs to use conflict with local fish managers or conflict between other user groups to generate membership for your club. One of the easiest ways to get membership is to get somebody to fight. It's harder to get someone to work with and generate membership for people that are going to be working. But if they're going to be fighting, it seems to be our nature, we can rally to the cause and rally to it fast. I urge you, though, to remember that your professional fish managers are there. Well, most of ours, and I don't think of a single one that isn't that way, because they love to fish, because they thought they were going to get to handle fish instead of environmental impact reports. But basically, people that are equally dedicated to that as you are. The only complaint I ever get from fish managers is primarily they give me a little baloney about pay, which is, all of us are concerned about that. But the real concern is that they can't do enough for fish, and they're spending too damn much time doing things that they'd rather be out there improving your fishery, and Addis and the central office keeps sending them all these water regulation permits and that sort of thing. So they're your best ally. They're the best ally you could ever have. And although some of them are single-minded, some of them are stubborn and difficult to communicate with, they're about equal to the kinds of stubborn and difficult to communicate with anglers. And so if you just go over that, maybe we can get together. I hope that as you go forth from this meeting, you will have seen the kinds of ideas that they're trying to generate and the basis upon which they're trying to develop their decisions. And as you go forth from this meeting, encourage that kind of excellence. This meeting has had research findings that were indeed excellent. They showed excellence, they showed a commitment, and they showed that there is a future for muskie fishing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. You know, after Jim got started here, I didn't think he was going to get into his own realm of problems with DNR and the people and the public and so forth. But I'd like to pass a little note on to Jim here. We had a motto way back. I think Dick Went and Lloyd Andrews and and Mertz back there and a few other people up there at Woodruff remember when people were beating us over the head once in a while, and we had to take it. We developed a pig Latin motto, not a beautiful Latin motto that Ed Crossman had up here. It went this way: Nolo bastardo carborundum. Don't let the bastards wear you down. The Midwest muskie angler has been ably represented by our first three speakers here, but we're fortunate this morning to have a representative from the East, not yeast, and a state that has had a long history of muskie management and propagation. New York was the first state to successfully propagate muskellunge before the turn of the century and to impose restrictive regulations on muskie fishing. Muskellunge management research has been one of the primary duties of our next speaker. Yesterday morning you heard a report on Chautauqua Lake, part of which our speaker was involved with. New York's past and present experience in obtaining fishery data by compulsory and voluntary means will be reviewed by Stephen R. Meridian, Senior Aquatic Biologist for the past 22 years with the New York Department of Environmental Conservation at Olean, New York. Steve.
Thank you, Art. It's great being in Wisconsin. If you've heard the national weather over the past 3 days, New York State has been flushed into the Atlantic Ocean. It's an honor to be a member of this first Symposium of Muskellunge. And thirdly, it was just great being at the banquet last night, especially when the door prizes were awarded. New York State has required mandatory reporting for muskie anglers in our two most westerly counties, Chautauqua and Cattaraugus, since 1941. Chautauqua Lake is a primary water within this region and the primary reason for instituting the reporting system. The department requires that the special muskie license with the appropriate catch data be returned to the management office by the 10th day following the closing of the season. Although a special license states that failure to return same by the 15th day following closure is a misdemeanor, many anglers have totally ignored that threat. During the initial year of reporting, and I'm going way back now, 1941, 85% of our licensed muskie anglers reported on the special license. Soon thereafter, in 1945, that return rate had dropped to 21% of the licensed anglers. Through the 1950s and 60s, the license reports were returned at a rate ranging somewhere between 22 and 28%. In 1974, we hit an all-time low. Only 12.5% of these licenses were returned back to the management office. So we decided that we must make some changes in our license format. At that time, the license was only a slip of paper that was issued at time of purchase. An angler must then fill out the license, take an envelope, fill that in with an address, put his own stamp on it, or her stamp, and return it to the agency. So in our brilliance, we decided that in 1975, we would institute a system whereby the special license was on a return, self-addressed postcard, postage paid, and all anyone had to do was fill in a few simple figures and go to the post office or mailbox and drop it in. Absolutely no cost to the angler. Our objective was to raise the return rate to a minimum of 50% of those licenses sold. The first year that we instituted this self-addressed, self-postage system, we had a doubling of license returns, up to 25% from the previous low I talked of 12%. Much to our dismay, in a very few short years, by 1977, our license return rate had dropped to 21%. I'm not a psychologist. I cannot explain this. During our past 6 years of reporting to the present time, our license return rate, and this is a mandatory return rate, has been leveled off at about 20%. Many people have asked why a more significant number of anglers don't return the license. For in our own conservation law, the failure to return same is listed as a misdemeanor. As a matter of fact, that section states that failure to return this license is punishable by a 3-month imprisonment or a $200 fine, or both. Needless to say, this misdemeanor has never been enforced. And very briefly, there's 3 reasons. About 1/3 of our special licensed muskie anglers are from other states other than New York. We are unable to chase down some 3,000 or 4,000 anglers to various states to apprehend them. And they must be apprehended in New York State, of course. There's another 6,000 plus resident muskie anglers, and to begin to even anticipate running throughout New York State and arresting 6,000 plus anglers is just not realistic. We have even thought of hand selecting. I don't know how we'd do this, but hand selecting a small percentage of these anglers and chasing them down. But I have personally discussed this with department attorneys, and they have labeled this, and it's a cute little term, selective enforcement. It's a no-no. And of course, if you analyze the cost of enforcing this for all 8, 9, 10,000 licensed anglers, that's just the cost far outweighs the benefits. Probably the most effective action to encourage a return of these licenses would be to withhold the individual's following year license until we had a return of his previous license. But this would be a terrible administrative headache, and in all honesty, the volunteer data that we had returned in such an instance would probably be close to worthless, believing that we're dealing with a hostile angler. Catch data on these mandatory reports includes such things as the date of catch, the length, a tag number if one is present, the water of catch, because we're dealing in about 6 waters, not just Chautauqua Lake. Also, the number of days that the angler has fished during that year, the number of sublegal muskies released, and the number of legal muskies released. We have collected and cataloged an enormous amount of data since 1941, but the relative value of this data in managing Chautauqua Lake is very questionable. The examination of these reports and comparing the angler catch per effort with the catch per effort in department survey nets for any given number of years has suggested an inverse relationship. Also, there appears to be a variability in the angler's catch per effort and the percentage of anglers submitting reports. The angler length data on these mandatory reports seems to be consistent with the changes of legal size limits, which is encouraging to know, but the data is not segregated by sex of the muskellunge. The most significant contribution of these special licenses is that it has provided a reliable index of our angling catch. And even though we cannot verify any relationship between the reported catch and muskie abundance, we feel that the index of angler effort is worth this effort of a special muskie license. Also, the historic data value, and I've mentioned this before, since 1941 we've been collecting the data, is probably worth the relatively inexpensive mandatory reporting license system. Within the past 10 years, cooperative anglers, now we're on a different term, we've just been talking mandatory, cooperative anglers have assisted in Chautauqua Lake. Approximately 10 years ago, the utilization of a number of a newly formed Muskies Incorporated club who volunteered to maintain a diary resulted in a very dismal experience. I hate to admit that here, but I'm going to tell it the way it is. We had a training session, and we recruited 18 diarists who were very anxious to maintain a fishing catch diary and also report their other activities involved with muskellunge fishing. Of the 18 cooperators who agreed and attended a training session to keep diaries, there was a return of 2 back to the agency, and this followed 3 written requests back to each and every one of those cooperators. There was a major problem here, and that problem was the lack of a true commitment by both the club and undoubtedly by the agency to some respect. And the reason for that was there were very poor objectives to this, quote, study. A very positive experience, though, of cooperative diarists in New York State was the New York State Bass Study, which took place between 1977 and 1980. While recruiting for anglers, we did ask those anglers which were becoming cooperators for Chautauqua Lake maintain catch data not only of their bass but of muskellunge. The return of these diaries through that bass study program resulted in a varied but roughly 70 to 75% return rate. It did, though, mandate an effort on the agency's part. There were 4 written requests and in many instances a telephone request to achieve that 75% response. So it still wasn't easy. Some interesting pieces of information have come from this, quote, bass study. And I'm speaking bass, and I know that, and this is a Muskie Symposium. But this is all, you can use bass, but we're talking muskie. In general, the cooperators in our study comprised only 5% of the angling effort in the study water, Chautauqua Lake, 5%. But that 5% accounted for 50% of the fish in the diaries. And we know this from tag returns. This catch data was very, very superior to that of the untrained mandatory responses. The need to train anglers at a meeting was required in lieu of the written instructions only. Without insulting anyone, it has been our experience that when only written instructions are sent along with diaries without a training session, we're not quite sure that even the instructions are read through by many anglers. We covered certain topics at these training sessions, and I won't go through them all now, but as one might imagine, they were reading through instructions, passing out the written material, the diaries, assigning code numbers, securing the proper names, addresses, phone numbers, which we knew we must have to make our follow-ups, to cover such things as how to measure fish, and one might smile, but that's critical, how to record data, how to take unbiased records. And we also went through one of the other major objectives of the training sessions, and that was to go over the objectives of the study. We decided that anglers are very interested in maintaining records and being helpful, but you must explain why the study is being conducted. They're not dumb. They know what's going on, and they must have a full knowledge of why the study is being conducted. Even with this intensive one-on-one training during these bass studies, it was our experience that slightly over 10% of the diaries returned, and this is of the 70 to 75%, had some major mistakes. In closing now, let's compare the 2 sources of angling activities and their significance in managing muskie populations. There are 4 points that I've listed here that we should identify: needs, resources, commitment, and limitation. Prior to recruiting for any angler assistance, the agency must have a plan outlining objectives as to what information regarding the fishery is needed to answer management questions. In most cases, a cooperative venture will provide useful data, but will not be on a par with data collected by agency biologists. If a tag recovery program is part of a study, then there would be a critical need for cooperative anglers to record that catch data. For Chautauqua Lake, and I'm now referring back to the bass study, it would have required 311 hours per year of electrofishing to capture the number of bass reported by our cooperators. Now, if you expand this to the 3 years of the study, I've said 4, but the first year was a trial year, this equates to nearly 1,000 hours of actual electrofishing to collect the same number of fish that the anglers recorded. And now if you multiply that times the 3 years, we come to 3,000 hours, man-hours, and if you assume, and I'm being very conservative, that it takes at least that much additional time to the actual electrofishing, you're talking about 6,000 man-hours of time that New York State saved because we had cooperative anglers. If the agency resources are adequate, the biologists may have necessary time and funding to conduct the studies, and angler assistance is not absolutely required. When some assistance is necessary, then trained cooperators are far superior to the mandatory reporting system. If needs and resources mandate the assistance of anglers, the success of the program will depend on a commitment, and I'm underlining that word, a commitment, from both the angler and the agency biologist. Anglers must be prepared to attend one or more training sessions and maintain records throughout the study. The agency must assign a biologist to the program as coordinator and meet with the anglers as often as necessary to attain study objectives. Without a total commitment, and that is both by the agency and the angler, then collecting and the time involved of all of the information could be wasting everyone's time. When the bass study was first discussed, New York Bass agreed to be the lead agent to recruit cooperators. Some chapters fulfilled that obligation. Others failed miserably. The agency had to meet this requirement, and the commitment on the agency's part was to then fulfill that need. Whenever the needs, the resources deem that anglers are necessary, and if a total agreement is committed, then the meeting of both groups must understand the limitations which exist. While some muskie anglers are very capable of collecting and recording both simple and sophisticated data, others will never meet the requirements. Prior to any study, a trial year should be planned. Angler records must be checked throughout the year and corrections made as needed. Only those anglers able to maintain satisfactory records should be used for the study contribution. During the Chautauqua Bass study, 10% of the anglers who were cooperators caught 60% of the fish, and the top 30% of the anglers accounted for 86% of the fish. The point here is you don't need a whole lot of people contributing data to be meaningful. In summary, angler assistance can be helpful and necessary to complete a data need, but only if the agency cannot complete the need without help. If anglers are used, then the agency and the anglers must be totally committed, and I underline the word again, and maintain a constant one-on-one relationship, communication, both ways. The key to better angling assistance, whether mandatory or cooperative, is constant communication from the agency, and this should include written reports on study progress and data summaries. Thank you.
Well, it's nice to go back 40 years again when we hear what happened in New York State 40 years ago, but we must take time out to show you that changes do take place. In 40 years, you lose a lot of hair. And there are a lot of shiny beans out here right now. And we don't lose that genetically in all ways. Sometimes you get beat over the head, too. But being the senior member of this panel, I must tell you about a remark one of the gals in the group here made about me being a senior citizen sex symbol. Well, let me tell you how that works out. The other night, a beautiful woman rapped at my door, our door, at the Radisson here, night before last, and when she opened it, she gasped, "My God, I got the wrong room." I said, "You've got the right room, all right, lady, but you're 30 years too late." I don't want to impinge on the time of the next panel, and I had a wrap-up organized here, but I think that we should give you an opportunity to have at this panel with questions. So at this time, I'm going to turn the program over to the audience, and we hope we can exact some of your questions of the panel here. Any hands? Bob.
When you get a minimal amount of data like that from a study like when you started, I'd be curious to know of the data that was used. Did you just throw the study out completely then, or did you try to make use of the data that you got?
Steve, would you repeat that question and give the answer?
Okay, the question was, when we received a minimal amount of data, now Bob, are you referring to our mandatory results, returns? On the BASS study. Do we just throw that data out, or do we utilize it? As a matter of fact, we look at the BASS study as an extremely successful study. I don't know if you're referring to minimal as 50, or rather 70 to 75% return, but we do have an excellent report that is in draft stages now, about 3 inches thick, and we do regard it as an excellent study of cooperative ventures. So it's not thrown out, absolutely not. We have been able to tabulate just a ream of data from that study.
How much more time do you think I can give them?
I would say not over 2 minutes.
Bob, with your experience in collecting mandatory data, what would your suggestion be to other state agencies who are contemplating or just thinking about in some fashion trying to get more data for themselves?
Would I recommend mandatory versus cooperative ventures? I think I would, the question being, okay, the question being that, I may have forgotten the question already. When another agency or state wishes to attain more data, correct me if I'm mistaken here, but what would my recommendations be? Well, I think in general I was trying to overlay here that my recommendations would be to go with some cooperative venture. And that is to plan a study with objectives and have a scope of study that is reasonable. Don't plan on a 45-year study. That was never intended, though. But plan a study with some reasonable time frames and go upon it with some realistic views so that you don't have to have thousands of anglers. You don't have to expend 20 years or 10 years even to attain the data. Go at a shortest time frame, probably a fewer number of anglers, but do it as a cooperative venture, using trained anglers. That absolutely is the key.
Excuse me, Steve. We have time for one more question, a quick one. Thank you for your support. And you bet.
I'd like to direct this to Jim Addis. Referring specifically to muskie fishing in northern Wisconsin, can you give us a candid, quick comment on what you expect the effect of the Voigt decision will have on this?
The question is, what do I expect candidly the effect of the Voigt decision will be on muskie fishing in northern Wisconsin? The candid response is I don't know. I think that it depends entirely on how well muskie anglers and the rest of the non-Indian community work with the Indian community to understand the significance of muskie fishing and the fragility of muskie fishing. And that's about where it's at. The final decisions will either be made through negotiation or the courts. But I think that can be tempered by the way we behave in response to it.
Thank you, Jim. I'd like to close by saying that unprecedented beneficial changes could become a reality of muskellunge management if the present attitude of acceptance by muskellunge anglers continues. The contributions and benefits chronicled by this panel may someday be outshadowed by the ultimate if such kind of a support is achieved. And old Ike Walton's ghost would be astonished at what his, quote, inquiring, searching, observing wit, hope, and patience, unquote, have brought about. Thank you, panel, and thank you, audience. You enjoyed it.